138 species raised their markers. 2 abstained. 0 opposed. The Galactic Senate's disarmament decree passed in under 4 minutes, which was, by Senate standards, practically instantaneous. Most decrees took weeks of argument, amendment, and procedural delay. This one had been prepared quietly, moved through committee without announcement, and placed on the floor with barely 12 hours of notice to the member delegations. The human seat had been given the same 12 hours as everyone else. Delegate Aura Vesh of the Sorvathi stood at the central podium as the result was confirmed, her pale skin catching the cold blue light of the chamber ceiling. She was tall for her species, which was already tall, and she held the podium the way someone holds a thing they have always believed belongs to them. "The Senate recognizes the result," she said. "The disarmament decree is binding on all member species operating under provisional charter status. Earth and its affiliated territories will be required to surrender all military vessels, weapons stockpiles, and planetary defense installations within 60 standard cycles. Compliance will be verified by Senate inspection teams." She paused, not for effect. She simply did not think she needed to say more. In the back of the chamber, at a seat that was smaller than those around it, and positioned 3 rows behind the nearest Allied delegation, Ambassador Rhea Nair sat with her hands folded on the table in front of her. She was a compact woman, South Asian, mid-40s, with dark hair pulled back from her face and eyes that had a habit of looking at things longer than most people were comfortable with. She wore the standard dark navy diplomatic uniform of the Earth mission, plain, no decorations except for a small pin on her collar, the Earth emblem, a pale blue circle. She had not moved during the vote. She had not spoken. She had not raised any objection or called for a delay. She was listening to Aura Vesh finish her statement, and she was thinking. Senator Brack Ullen, whose seat was 2 rows ahead of hers and to the left, had turned his head slightly when the vote completed. He was Vithrani, a reptilian species, heavy-bodied with dark green-brown scales and eyes that moved independently. He did not look at Rhea directly, but the slight turn of his head, the pause in his stillness, said enough. He had been the second abstention. Aura Vesh looked toward the human delegation. "Ambassador Nair, Earth has 10 cycles to file its formal response and begin coordination with Senate inspection teams. Do you have anything to say at this time?" Every head in the chamber turned. Rhea looked up from her folded hands. She looked at Aura Vesh for a moment, just a moment, and then she said, "We will respond in due time." That was all. Aura Vesh blinked her large, reflective eyes once, and moved on to the next item on the agenda. In the gallery above, Councillor Feet Marrows watched through the observation glass. He was the senior Senate strategist, the one who had written the decree, who had run the committee, who had spent 14 months building the coalition that made the vote possible. He was angular, gray-scaled, precise in every movement, and he had, in his long career, successfully pushed through 41 major policy actions. This was his 42nd. He watched Rhea Nair gather her materials, stand, and walk toward the chamber exit without looking at anyone, and he felt what he always felt when a difficult thing was finally done. Satisfaction. He had expected argument. He had prepared for legal challenges, procedural motions, impassioned speeches about sovereignty and precedent. He had a response team ready. He had counter-statements drafted. He had 3 different escalation plans depending on how loud the humans got. They had said 4 words. Marrows turned away from the glass. "She is frightened," he said to his aide. 4 words is what a frightened delegate says when they have nothing. His aide wrote it down. Below, in the corridor outside the chamber, Rhea walked at the same pace she always walked. A junior attaché from the Earth mission fell into step beside her and handed her a secure tablet without speaking. She took it, glanced at the display, and kept walking. She did not send a message. She did not make a call. She waited until she was inside the secured transport vessel, door sealed, sweep confirmed clean, before she sat down and began composing the transmission to Earth. She did not write in diplomatic language. She wrote plainly, because the people receiving it did not need ceremony. She wrote they passed it, 60 cycles, full compliance expected, they think we will fold. She paused, added one more line. Begin iron floor. Then she sent it. The transport moved away from the Senate station into open space, and Rhea looked out through the small porthole at the stars, which were the same stars that had been there before the vote and would be the same stars after whatever came next. She had spent 11 years as Earth's delegate to the Senate. She knew how the Senate thought. She knew what they saw when they looked at humanity, a young species, a violent history, a planet that had barely stopped fighting itself before it reached the stars. They saw something that could be managed. She leaned her head back and closed her eyes. 60 cycles. It was almost generous. The transmission reached Earth at 3:40 local time in Geneva, where the Joint Defense Council kept its primary facility. It was routed through 3 relay stations, encrypted at each one, and decoded only at the final terminal inside a room that had no windows and only one door. General Dario Esposito read it standing up because he had been standing when it came through, and he did not bother to sit down. He was a large man, broad across the shoulders, with a short gray beard and the kind of face that had been serious for so long it had stopped being an expression and become a feature. He read the message twice. Then he set the tablet down and said, "Get me the council, 90 minutes." His aide left the room at something faster than a walk. 93 minutes later, 12 people sat around the table in the deep briefing room. Rhea's face was on the main screen, transmitted from her secure terminal aboard the Earth transport still moving through Senate space. She looked the same as she always looked. The others in the room looked the way people look when they have been woken before dawn for something serious. Esposito did not waste time. "Iron floor," he said, "we begin today." One of the civilian council members, a policy director named Annis Bauer, leaned forward. "Are we certain we want to move this fast? There may still be room for negotiation. The Senate has backed down before on." "Not on this." Esposito pulled up the holographic display. The star map bloomed across the table, Senate territory marked in pale blue, human space in white, the vast neutral corridors between them in gray. Feet Marrows built this coalition over 14 months. He does not build things he intends to negotiate down. This is not a bargaining position. This is a removal. Nobody argued with that. Iron Floor had been written 31 years ago by a defense planning team that most people in the current government had never heard of. It had been updated 6 times since. It assumed one thing, that the day would come when the Senate decided humanity was more convenient disarmed, and that humanity needed to have already moved everything important before that day arrived. Esposito walked them through it section by section. The fleet dispersal had already begun. Not because of the message. It had begun 4 months ago when Senate intelligence activity near human space increased beyond normal patterns. Ships had been moving, quietly, using commercial traffic lanes and filing civilian shipping manifests. Deep space installations had been transferred off official registry. Weapons caches had been relocated to positions that Senate inspection teams would not know to look for because the coordinates existed in only 3 places, all of them inside this room. Admiral Sona Akafer appeared on a secondary screen. She was on board the ECV Unbroken, which was already in deep space, dark, running minimal power. She was a tall woman, composed in the way that people who have spent many years on warships become composed, not calm exactly, but settled. She gave her status report in under 2 minutes. 3rd Fleet was in position. 7th was moving. 2nd was already where it needed to be. "What about civilian observation?" Rhea asked from her screen. "We have a press pool problem," said the communications director, a man named Hideo Sato. Tessa Brandt filed a dispatch yesterday asking why 17 registered cargo vessels departed Titan Station within the same 6-hour window. What did we tell her? The scheduled maintenance rotation. Did she believe it? No. Rhea almost smiled, almost. Let her watch, she will write what she sees. What she sees right now is cargo ships, that is fine. Esposito nodded. He moved to the next section of the briefing. The classified installation at the edge of the solar system, designated Site 7, required a specialist team. He pulled up a personnel file. Yusuf al-Rashid was an engineer, 41 years old, with clearance levels that exceeded his official rank by a significant margin. He had spent 9 years maintaining the kind of systems that did not appear in public defense budgets. Esposito had worked with him twice before. He was not a soldier. He was better than a soldier for what Site 7 needed. Al-Rashid ships out in 8 hours, Esposito said. He knows what to do when he gets there. The council spent another hour on logistics. When the meeting ended, people left quickly, because there was a great deal of work to do, and 60 cycles was not as long as it sounded when you were moving an entire civilization's hidden military architecture. Rhea's screen stayed on after the others left. Esposito stood in front of it. They really believe we'll fold, she said. Yes. That is going to be a problem for them. Yes, he said again. There was a brief silence. Outside the facility, Geneva was beginning to get light. Somewhere above it and above the clouds and above the atmosphere, Senate surveillance drones were doing their routine passes over human space, recording what they expected to find, a species beginning the slow, quiet process of giving up its weapons. They were finding exactly that. Because Iron Floor had been designed, from its very first page, to look exactly like compliance. Esposito looked at the star map still glowing above the table. Get some rest, he told Rhea. She cut the feed. He stayed where he was for a while, looking at the map, at the white spaces and the gray ones, at 60 cycles worth of distance between where things were now and where they were going. He was not worried. Worry was for people who had not planned. He had planned for 31 years. He turned off the display and went to find coffee. On day 44 of the 60-cycle deadline, Counselor Feet Marrows received his 7th surveillance summary from the Intelligence Division and found nothing in it that concerned him. Human space was quiet. Fleet movements had dropped. The 3 largest registered Earth military stations had filed decommission paperwork with the Senate Trade Bureau, a legal requirement under the decree. 2 of them had already gone dark on long-range sensors. Communication traffic between Earth and its outer colonies had decreased by 31%. Everything looked exactly the way it was supposed to look when a species was complying. Marrows set the report down and moved to the next item on his schedule. In the outer corridor of the Senate Intelligence Wing, his senior analyst, a 4-armed species called the Drevathi named Chorus, stared at the same report data on her terminal and felt something she did not have a precise word for. Not alarm, not certainty. Something between the two, a pressure behind her reasoning that said the picture was too clean. She had been in intelligence work for 22 years. She had seen species comply under pressure. She had seen species resist. She had seen species pretend to comply while resisting. What she had never seen was a species go this quiet this fast. Humans did not go quiet. Everything in their behavioral profile said so. They argued, they protested, they filed legal challenges, they gave speeches. Even when they eventually accepted an outcome, they made noise on the way there. 31% drop in communication traffic. She ran the numbers again. Then she sent a flag up the chain. The flag reached Marrows's desk 3 days later, buried under 14 other documents. He read the summary, noted her concern, wrote a single word in the margin, overcautious, and moved on. On day 51, Senator Brack Ullen sent a private message to a human contact he had worked with during a trade negotiation 7 years ago. The contact was a mid-level officer at the Earth diplomatic mission, a man named Pharaoh, who Brack had found to be straightforward in ways that most diplomats were not. The message was short. It said, "Whatever you are doing, the Senate will not negotiate once the deadline passes. Marrows has secondary orders prepared. I do not know what they are. Be careful." The message was received. Pharaoh read it, encrypted it, and forwarded it without comment. He received no reply. On day 56, Tessa Brandt filed her 14th dispatch from her observation post aboard a press vessel in high orbit above Earth. She had been trying for 2 weeks to get access to the Titan shipyards and had been told, politely and then less politely, that the yards were undergoing scheduled maintenance and were closed to outside visitors. Her last 4 dispatches had been about the strangeness of the quiet, the way Earth's orbital lanes, usually busy with military and commercial traffic, had thinned out in ways that no official statement quite explained. Her 14th dispatch contained one line that her editor almost cut for being too speculative. It said, "I have been covering Earth's military for 9 years. I know what drawdown looks like. This is not drawdown. I do not know what this is." Her editor left the line in. On day 58, Rhea Nair held a press conference from the Earth diplomatic mission. She stood at a plain podium, no backdrop, no prepared visual aids. She answered 12 questions from the press pool in attendance. She was asked directly whether Earth intended to comply with the full terms of the decree. She said, "We respect the Senate's authority to make requests, and we respect our own authority to respond." Every journalist in the room wrote down the same question in their notes. What does that mean? None of them asked it out loud, because something about the way she said it made asking feel like a mistake. That evening, General Esposito gave the order. He did not give it dramatically. He sent it as an encrypted standard priority message from his terminal to 6 recipients. The message contained 2 words followed by a confirmation code. Begin response. 6 hours later, on the outer edge of the solar system, Yusuf al-Rashid was inside Site 7, which was not a building exactly, but a network of systems distributed across 12 connected installations, each one looking from the outside like an abandoned relay station. He was checking the last calibration sequence on a system that had taken 4 years and a budget that did not officially exist to build. He was a methodical man. He did not hurry. He checked each node against his tablet, confirmed the connection status, noted one minor variance in the 3rd array and corrected it manually, and then ran the full diagnostic one more time. Everything was ready. He sealed the access panel, picked up his toolkit, and sent one line back to Esposito. Site 7 is green. At the Senate Border Monitoring Station, designated Outpost Varan, which sat at the edge of human space and had been quietly tracking Earth's compliance progress for 58 cycles, the duty officer noticed that the automated relay network had stopped reporting. Not malfunctioned, not gone to error status, just stopped. She sent a ping, no response. She sent a second ping on the backup frequency. Nothing. She reached for the alert panel and then noticed that the station adjacent to Outpost Varan, the one 12 light-minutes away, had also gone silent. She looked at her board, another station, then 3 more. In 40 seconds, 12 border monitoring stations along the human space boundary had gone completely dark. No distress signals, no wreckage, no error codes. Just silence. She hit the alert. By the time the signal reached the Senate Intelligence Division, 2 more stations had stopped reporting. Chorus was already at her terminal when the alert came through. She looked at the map. She looked at where the silence was spreading. She sent one message to Marrows. It said, "Sir, I think we made a mistake." Day 60 arrived the way deadlines always do, not with ceremony, but with a date on a calendar that had once seemed far away and now was simply today. The Senate compliance chamber was prepared. White banners of procedural formality hung from the upper rails. A documentation team was ready to record the formal surrender of Earth's military registry. Senate media correspondents had been given press access to the outer gallery. Oravesh had a prepared statement. The human seat was empty. Oravesh looked at it for a long moment before the session opened. She had expected Rhea Nair to be present. Even species that refused to comply usually sent someone to argue. The empty seat was something she did not have a category for, so she placed it in the category of deliberate insult and moved forward. "The session is called to order," she said. "We note for the record that the Earth delegation has not appeared. The deadline for compliance under the disarmament decree has elapsed. The Senate will proceed to." The chamber's main communication array activated without being opened. The transmission was clean, no static, no delay, and it came from a location the Senate's tracking system could not pin. Rhea Nair's face appeared on the primary display, the same face, the same expression, the same dark navy uniform, and the same small pale blue pin at her collar. "Delegate Vesh," she said, "thank you for having the session ready. I wanted to be punctual." Oravesh's reflective eyes did not change. "You were required to be present in person, Ambassador." "I am present," Rhea said. "I am simply not where you expected me to be." A murmur moved through the chamber. Rhea did not pause for it. Earth's response to the disarmament decree is as follows. "We will not be surrendering our military vessels, our weapons stockpiles, or our planetary defense systems. Not today, not at any future deadline, not under any version of this decree." The murmur became noise. Oravesh raised a hand for order. "This is a violation of binding Senate law," she said. "Earth operates under provisional charter status. Refusal to comply." "Carry consequences," Rhea said. "Yes, I read the charter, all of it." She paused briefly. "Including the sections Councillor Marrows chose not to cite when he presented the decree." In the upper gallery, Feet Marrows went very still. Rhea continued, "I would like to show the Senate something." The secondary displays around the chamber activated. Long-range sensor feeds, live, pulling data from Senate monitoring arrays that were still functional, the ones that had not gone dark, the ones that covered the space between Earth's territory and the Senate's inner systems. The feeds showed ships. Not a few ships, not a patrol group or a task force. Ships in numbers that the displays were struggling to process, coming from multiple vectors simultaneously, each one broadcasting an open identification signal, each one flagged with Earth registration, each one moving in organized formation at a speed that was unhurried and absolute. The chamber went quiet in stages, the way a room goes quiet when people begin to understand something. A Senate officer at the technical station said, in a voice that was trying to sound professional and not quite managing it, "I am reading over 4,000 contacts. These are not, this classification does not," he stopped, started again. "Many of these vessels are not in any registered military database." That was because they were never in any registered military database. Some of them had been civilian haulers 3 years ago. They had since received plating, armament, and system upgrades that the Senate's Intelligence Division had no record of because the work had been done in installations that looked, from the outside, like abandoned relay stations. Others were warships that had been in service for years under names and registry numbers, that existed on a ledger kept in a room with no windows and one door. Others were things that had no direct precedent in any Senate military category. Oravesh looked at the displays for a long time. Then she said quietly to the chamber rather than to the camera, "How long have they had this?" Nobody answered her. Rhea's voice came through the speakers again. "Delegate Vesh, Those ships are not here to attack anyone. They are here because we decided to stop hiding them. For 30 years, the Senate's intelligence community told its leadership that humanity was a minor military power with an outsized reputation. I would like to formally correct that assessment. In the upper gallery, Counselor Marrows finally moved. He turned to his aide and said, voice low, "Get me the Defense Fleet Commander. I want an intercept order." His aide stepped out, came back 90 seconds later, leaned close. "Sir," the aide said carefully, "the fleet commander says. He is counting over 4,000 contacts on open sensors. He says those are the ones they want us to see. He is asking for clarification on what intercept means in this context." Marrows said nothing. Below in the chamber, Senator Brack Ullen watched the displays. He watched the formations that stretched across the sensor range, each ship broadcasting openly, none of them doing anything except being exactly where they were. He had spent the last 58 cycles uneasy, and he now understood with complete clarity what that unease had been about. He had sent his message to Pharaoh. He had not heard back. Looking at the displays, he understood why. They had not needed his warning. They had been ready long before the warning was possible. On the sensor feeds, a new formation appeared from the far side of the human territorial boundary, adding several hundred more contacts to the count. The tracking system made a small, tired sound trying to keep up. Rhea's face remained on the primary display, waiting, patient, giving the chamber all the time it needed. The Senate chamber had a protocol for almost everything. There were procedures for declarations of war, procedures for the expulsion of member species, procedures for disputed territories and trade sanctions and ecological disasters. There was a 40-page document governing what to do if a Senate session was interrupted by a seismic event on the host planet. There was no procedure for this. Admiral Sona Okafor began her broadcast without announcement. The chamber's display system simply accepted the incoming feed because it was a valid open signal, and the system had been designed to receive valid open signals. Her face appeared alongside Rhea's on the secondary screens, a tall woman, dark-skinned, in the gray fleet uniform of Earth's Navy, standing in front of a viewport that showed the void of deep space, and beyond it, a formation of human ships so densely packed that it looked at first like a visual artifact. "I am Admiral Okafor," she said, "commanding officer of Earth's 3rd Deep Space Fleet. I am broadcasting from the ECV Unbroken, which is currently holding position at the outer boundary of neutral space alongside elements of the 2nd and 7th Fleets." She paused. "For those keeping count, what you are seeing on your sensors represents approximately 60% of Earth's active deep space capability. I want to be clear about that number." The chamber was silent. 60%, she said again. "The other 40% is elsewhere. Some of it is closer to you than you might expect." Ora Vesh, to her credit, kept her composure. "This is an act of aggression against the Senate and its member species," she said. "You are positioning military forces in a threatening manner." "We are holding position in neutral space," Okafor said. "We have not entered Senate territory. We have not fired anything. We have not jammed your communications, blocked your shipping, or touched a single Senate asset." She tilted her head slightly. "Although you may have noticed some of your border monitoring stations went quiet. That was an attack on Senate infrastructure." "No," Rhea said from her own screen. "It was a demonstration that we could. There is a difference. Every one of those stations will return to full operation the moment we tell them to. Nothing was damaged. Nothing was destroyed. We turned them off. To show you that we could turn them off." She let that sit for a moment. "The question the Senate should be asking is not what we have done. It is what we have chosen not to do." In the upper gallery, Feet Marrows watched the chamber fracture. It did not fracture loudly. It fractured the way a coalition fractures when the calculation changes quietly, one piece at a time. He could see it in the delegates below. The species who had voted with him because they believed it was safe to vote with him were now recalculating. Safety was a number, and the number had just changed. 3 smaller species delegations had already pulled their senior staff into private conference. The Dravathi bloc was consulting in whispers. The Murathi delegate, who had been one of Marrow's most reliable supporters, was no longer looking at the chamber screens. She was looking at the floor. Senator Brack Ullen stood. In the Senate, standing without being called upon was a breach of procedure. He stood anyway. I formally withdraw the Vithrani delegation from the Disarmament Decree Coalition, he said. His voice was even. I withdraw our prior vote in support of the decree and request that the record reflect the Vithrani position as opposed. Oravesh turned toward him. Senator Ullen, this is not the time for. It is the only time, he said, because there will not be another one. He sat back down. 2 other delegations rose within the next 60 seconds and said the same thing in different words. Rhea waited until they were done. Then she continued. I want to address the Senate directly, she said, not as a delegate responding to a decree, as a human being explaining something that I think has been misunderstood for a very long time. The chamber gave her silence. Humanity is not aggressive, she said. We are experienced. There is a difference. We came from a planet where everything that existed had to fight to exist, including us. We spent thousands of years fighting each other. We were not proud of all of it, but we learned things from it that species who were handed peace never had to learn. She paused. One of those things is this. The moment you agree to be defenseless is the moment you invite someone to decide your future for you. We decided, a very long time ago, that we were not going to do that. On every screen in the chamber, the sensor feeds continued showing human ships holding their positions, still, patient, broadcasting openly. Then, for exactly 3 seconds, every communication satellite in Senate-controlled space flickered. Not went dark, not failed, flickered a brief, clean interruption and then perfect restoration. Every signal, every channel, every relay restored without loss, as if something had reached out, touched every point in the network simultaneously and let go. From Site 7, at the edge of the solar system, Yusuf al-Rashid sent one line to Esposito. Calibration confirmed. Oravesh looked around the chamber at faces that were no longer looking at her. Marrows called for a vote on military response. He needed 32 supporting delegations to reach the procedural threshold. He got 11. The emergency closed session convened 2 hours after the failed vote, in a smaller chamber with no press access and no gallery. 41 delegations attended. The rest had sent their regrets through official channels, which in Senate language meant they had already made their decision and did not want to be seen making it. Feet Marrows spoke first. He was a careful man, and he chose his words the way someone chooses their footing on uncertain ground. He acknowledged that the situation had developed beyond his initial projections. He proposed a staged withdrawal of the decree, contingent on Earth agreeing to limit fleet movements in certain corridors. He presented this as a reasonable compromise. 3 delegations nodded. Oravesh spoke second. She called the fleet display an act of coercion and said that yielding under threat set a precedent that would invite future aggression from every species watching. She was not wrong about the precedent. She was wrong about which direction the precedent cut. Then the chamber doors opened. Nobody had authorized this. There was a procedural officer stationed outside who had apparently decided that what was walking through the door outweighed the procedure. Rhea Nair came in alone, without staff, without equipment, and took a seat at the table that had not been set out for her. Everyone in the room looked at her. She had been in Senate space for the entire 60 cycles. She let them sit with that for a moment. I'm not here to argue, she said. I am here to finish this. She set her hands flat on the table. The disarmament decree will not produce compliance, not from Earth. Not at 60 cycles, not at 600. You could bring every Senate military asset to our border, and the result would be a war that none of us would benefit from in a galaxy that is watching to see what you do next. She looked at Marrows. Counselor, you built a coalition by telling those species it was safe to stand against humanity. That calculation is no longer accurate. They know it. You know it. Marrows said nothing. What I am offering, Rhea said, is a different arrangement, not surrender, not on either side. A mutual defense framework. Humanity takes a full seat in the Senate, not provisional, not conditional. Equal standing, equal vote, equal voice. In exchange, the fleet withdraws from its current position to agreed neutral coordinates. Earth's defense installations are kept in place, but placed under a joint monitoring arrangement that every member species can observe. The Murathi delegate, who had been quiet for 2 hours, looked up. And if the Senate declines? Rhea considered the question as if it was asked in good faith, which she was not certain it was. If the Senate declines, Earth withdraws from the Senate entirely. Every human contractor, every trade license, every medical research partnership, every technology exchange agreement. We have been in provisional status for 18 years. We have contributed more to Senate infrastructure in those 18 years than the 3 species ahead of us in the membership queue combined. You know what that is worth because you have been using it. She paused. Ask yourself whether the Senate can absorb that gap. Ask yourself how many of those 40 species in this room need something from us that they cannot get anywhere else. Then tell me whether declining makes sense. The room was very quiet. Feet Marrows looked at his hands. He had spent 14 months building the decree. He had built it on a premise, that humanity would weigh the cost of resistance against the cost of compliance and choose compliance, because that was what every other species had done. He had a deep file on human history, and he had read it and concluded that humans were ultimately pragmatic. He had been correct about that. He had been wrong about what their pragmatism would produce. He had not accounted for the possibility that a pragmatic species would spend 30 years building the infrastructure to make resistance cheaper than surrender. He had not accounted for iron floor. He had not accounted for any of it because it had never occurred to him that a species would plan this carefully for a threat that had not yet materialized. He had thought of it as paranoia. He understood now that it had a different name. Experience. The vote on Rhea's counter-proposal took 40 minutes. There were procedural challenges, 2 walkouts, and 1 delegate who demanded a full legal review before committing. By the end, the disarmament decree was suspended indefinitely by a margin large enough to make the result unambiguous. Rhea stood, gathered nothing because she had brought nothing, and walked to the door. Senator Brack Ullen met her eyes as she passed. She gave him a small nod. He returned it. She stepped out into the corridor. Tessa Brandt was not supposed to be in the corridor. She was registered to the press area on the other side of the building. She had apparently walked to the wrong floor and then stayed. She was standing against the wall with her recording device at her side, not recording, just watching. Rhea walked past her without stopping. Outside, in the Senate Plaza, the pale lavender sky was clear. Delegations were already emerging in 2s and 3s, moving toward the human mission annex. Conversations that could not happen inside were beginning to happen outside. Tessa filed her final dispatch from a step near the plaza fountain, her recorder in her lap, her voice flat and tired. She ended it the way she ended all her best pieces, with someone else's words. She repeated what Rhea had said in the press conference, the line that nobody had asked about. We respect our own authority to respond. Then she said, they wanted us defenseless. We showed them what we looked like when we stopped being polite about being armed. I think they prefer us polite. She stopped the recording and looked out at the plaza. On Earth in Geneva, Esposito received the session summary and read it at his desk. He read it all the way through, set it down, and looked out the window at the city going about its ordinary morning. People walking, transit moving, A sky full of clouds that did not know or care about anything that had happened in the last 60 cycles. He picked up his coffee, which had gone cold, and drank it anyway. The fleet would hold its position for another 12 hours while the paperwork was filed. Then Akafor would move them back. Not all the way back. There was no all the way back anymore, but back enough. The Senate had wanted to manage humanity. Instead, they had measured it. Esposito finished his coffee, filed 3 response confirmations, and went to find something to eat. Outside, the city kept moving. The stars kept burning. And somewhere at the edge of the solar system, Site 7 sat quiet, calibrated, and waiting, the way all prepared things wait, with complete patience, and no doubt at all that it would eventually be needed again.